G'day, Dons fans, and welcome back to Don the Stat. A spirited first quarter was followed by a poor second quarter before a second half rally resulted in a 67-point loss to Geelong at Kardinia Park last week. Another week of innuendo surrounding our senior coach search and more media hyperbole, with the informed second-place Sydney Swans ahead of us at the MCG this Sunday. I'm Jonathan Walsh, and joining me as always is my co-host Ian Hume. Humey, how are you, mate?
I'm doing well here, Jono, and I can't believe we're at the second last round of the season. I know it's been a bit of a trudge going through such a long season with only a couple of wins, but it also seems to have flown by, probably because we get to do this every week. And yeah, I'm actually a little bit sad that the season's coming to an end, even though I think we're all ready for that last siren to be sounded so we can all have a bit of a break. But yeah, maybe I'm just a sicko like that. How are you, Jono?
Yeah, it's a bit like that, isn't it? I think September's always a happy, sad time because finals footy in Melbourne comes to life, but not being part of it isn't much fun either. So yeah, it won't be long now until we're missing football again. So hopefully we get 2 weeks of, some, I guess, strong displays from our group and we can finish the season with a little bit of momentum and something to feel good about going into 2027. But yeah, beyond footy, mate, I'm going okay. Another busy week, but it makes the weeks go quick and get around to the weekend. So yeah, all good on my end.
Very good. Well, look, before we get into it, as always, I'd like to acknowledge the people who have signed up to the Patreon this week. So big thanks to Paul Govier, Joel Sullivan and Terry Forster for joining the crew on the Patreon this week. Also like to say a big congratulations to longtime patron Jeremy Freeman for winning our coach question competition that we put out in last week's episode. There were some really good entries there, but Jeremy's stood above the crowd. Just told me today that his shirt has arrived. So Jeremy, I am expecting to see you wearing that on the weekend during pre-match drinks.
Well, let's hope it's T-shirt weather, mate. But yeah, it's great that even in the darkness of this season, the Don the Stat community continues to grow and bring passionate fans together. In a really safe space. It's been another week of a lot of really respectful debate, and there's a lot to debate at the moment, right? So it's been good fun. But in bigger news, mate, a big happy birthday to your son Oscar. He turned 4 yesterday. Hopefully you had a big day to celebrate and overindulged on birthday cake.
Well, it is a bit of a birthday week, and his 2 birthday parties, so the family birthday party and then the friend's birthday party are stretching over the weekend. So it is certainly a big occasion for Oscar, and he is, of my 2 children, he is the Essendon fan. We don't have favourites in this household, but at least we get to share Essendon together. He's really good at singing the song. Not that he's had many reasons to actually sing it in his short life, but once we do start winning, he's going to be very good at doing that. So yeah, definitely great for Oscar there. He's been alive pretty much the entire length of this podcast. We started back in 2022 and Oscar was born in August of 2022. Unfortunately, his birth coincided with you. I think you won a corporate box at a Marvel game. And I was unable to go because he'd just been born. I won't tell him that. If he ever listens to this, he'll know that it was his fault that I missed out on having that experience. But yeah, I'm actually about to turn 40, so things are happening very quickly in the Hume household. That life stages are getting ticked off, but it's always great to see them grow and experience joy, and hopefully one day that joy translates to seeing the Bombers win.
It's hard to believe that your youngest is 4 years old. It's happened really, really quick. I think you probably dodged a bullet that day missing out on that game, mate. It wasn't luckily that we had an open bar, that's for sure. But yeah, glad Oscar had a big day and hopefully lots of good stuff to look forward to this weekend.
Absolutely. And it is a big weekend for Bombers fans because there's so much happening on field. And I want to give a shout out to everyone who's going to do the triple this weekend. We've got the last main round of the VFL this Saturday, Windy Hill against the 4th place Swans. If the Bombers win that, they'll make the finals. If they lose, they probably just miss out. The VFL's had a really good back end of the season. It'd be great to see them get reward for the effort that they've shown. Both the VFL players and also the AFL listed players who've sort of been overlooked for senior selection, but have really been putting in the hard yards at VFL level. They should certainly be praised for that. Then on Sunday, back at Windy Hill for the opening of the AFLW season against the Brisbane Lions. So best of luck to the women's team in their first game. He's fingers crossed for a big year for them. And then everyone at Windy Hill is probably going to be jumping on the train and heading to the G for our game against the Swans. So it is a big Bombers weekend, and let us know in the comments or on our socials if you are going to do the treble this weekend. I'd like to hear the experience because unfortunately with all the birthday celebrations, I'm not going to be able to make any of them. I'll be watching the Swans game at home on the TV, and I'll be sort of sneaking glances at the AFLW game while I'm at a kids' party.
Yeah, I won't make the triple, but I've got something on Saturday, unfortunately, but I will be keeping an eye on the VFL game on my phone, but I will make the double on Sunday. I'm really looking forward to seeing how our W team goes against the Lions. They've got 3 debutants pulling on the sash for the first time, 2 making their AFL debut, so that's really, really exciting. Yeah, actually got a chance to go down to Windy Hill last Friday and got a bit of a tour of the upgraded facilities out there. They've done a really good job. Most of the upgrades to date have been player related and inside rather than sort of fan related, but I know there's still a lot more work to do out there and that will come, but it's really good that investment is happening. Windy Hill's hosting, I think, 4 AFLW Essendon games, and then 2 of those will be double headers with other teams playing their matches there as well. So yeah, good things happening out at Windy Hill. I got a little bit nostalgic actually stepping into my old office, but yeah, I'm looking forward to a big weekend of Don's footy. Shall we crack into the review against the Cats, mate?
Yeah, let's do it. And I think the result that we got was probably the result that we all expected. It's always a challenge going down to Geelong, whether we've been in good form or in different form or in bad form. Whatever stage of the season, they do seem to be a team that has our measure. And obviously, if we're going to compete against them, we need to start well in order to be in that contest. And, that first quarter, we were good in the contested part of the game. We broke even in contested possessions in that first quarter. We were able to create repeat stoppages and match them at stoppage clearance. We were out tackling them as well. And I think we spoke about that in the preview. If you're going to compete against Geelong, it's really important to get that stoppage game right. Games that Geelong are able to get an advantage in stoppage, that gives them territory. And once Geelong has territory, as we saw in the second quarter, it's really difficult to be able to do anything against them. And admittedly, the weather conditions probably helped slow the game down a bit and played into what we wanted to do. But, once we did get it forward and have that time in forward half, we just couldn't find a way to turn that into scores and weren't able to capitalise on the opportunities that were created. And that really contrasted with what happened down the other end. I know Geelong didn't exactly kick straight in that opening quarter, but they did, they did kick enough chances to ultimately go into that quarter time break 4 goals up. And it's probably more of it the way in which the game was playing out. I thought it was probably more of a 2-goal margin quarter, but unfortunately, because we couldn't put any meaningful score on the board, it meant we did go down by quite a significant margin at quarter time.
Yeah, the first 20 minutes of the game looked all right, didn't it? There was a lot of pressure, a lot of mistakes, skill errors on both sides. We had 2 really gettable opportunities. Pryor missed the set shot and then Kako from close range in general play. And I guess they're the ones that you really need to be taking in any game, but more so when you're playing in hostile territory. And in our case, a young team looking to settle against a really experienced team. And then the last 10 minutes of the quarter, it fell apart a fair bit. They got control on the outside. It was 11 contested marks out of 25 for the quarter came in that last 10 minutes. We got a little bit lucky that they only kicked 1-3. But yeah, I sort of got to quarter time really lamenting the Pryor and Kako misses. I felt, maybe, just maybe, if we had have converted those chances, we go into the quarter time break with the scoreboard looking okay, there or thereabouts, and in the contest. Instead, we're 25 points down and feeling a long way away.
Yeah, and the way they came out in the second quarter, you could tell that the way in which the first quarter played out really deflated them. And Solly apparently gave the players a massive spray at halftime for the way that the second quarter played out. And you saw it on field with your own eyes and you can see it in the numbers. Well, you can sort of tell the way they came out in that second quarter, that the way the first quarter had played out and the lack of taking their opportunities, it certainly played on their mind. And I know that Solly gave them a massive spray at halftime for the way the second quarter played out. And, you could see it with your eyes and in the way which we weren't competing at the same level. And the numbers really back that up for that eye test. So, as we've said numerous times this year, once we start losing the contest, we really struggle to contain teams on the outside. And that's what happened. So in that period of the second quarter, so most of the second quarter up to where we kicked our first goal for the match, we were down in contested possession by 10, and then we were blitzed on the outside. So we were down 20 marks and 32 in uncontested possessions. And unlike the first quarter, we're really good at stopping Geelong's flow, or we're able to create those repeat stoppage situations. There were only 13 stoppages created in that quarter. So we just couldn't contain their ball movement, particularly on turnover. Just for reference, the average ruck contest for, the AFL is up over 90, and some of those are centre clearances. But if you're only creating 13 stoppages in a quarter, and considering it was a wet night, you would expect there to be more stoppages. That's really low. That's not good enough in that sort of contest. And, it's just another data point showcasing that what we've talked about this year, that we just have these insipid periods in games that really cost us. And some of that is down to being a young side. But if you're going to be a good side, you have to be able to limit them, and you shouldn't be relying on your coach to point it out you at half time to adapt.
Yeah, it's a 20-minute period of the game where they kick 6 goals, 4-0. And story of probably not just this year, but last year, to be honest, as well, isn't it? Where, for the most part in most games, effort's been good, but we've just let ourselves down in sort of windows of footy where structure and particularly around the contest falls away. And in that period, we only had 2 uncontested marks in 20 minutes of footy to 18 to the Cats. So even when we did get our hands on the footy, we couldn't control it. And I do think that so much of that, in fact, is to do with what happened at the contest. Once we lose that shape when the ball's in dispute, we collapse in and then lose shape on the outside as well. So on the occasions that we won it, we didn't really have anywhere to go. There was no shape on the outside. 26 disposals to 66. And yeah, thankfully we were able to get a little bit out of the quarter and the half right at the end. We scored those last 2 goals, because up until that point it was looking really, really grim.
Yeah, indeed. I think most of us thought we'd go into halftime goalless, but unlike last week where we really struggled in red time, at least for that second quarter, we did manage to flip the script a bit and get some of those back-end scores, which we're normally conceding as opposed to getting ourselves. And our first goal of that quarter was a good example of what is possible when you're able to move the ball effectively.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we'll get to the clip, or I'll grab the clip up in just a second, and we'll share this on Patreon for those that aren't watching on YouTube. But Geelong were trying to close out the quarter, right? They were getting numbers behind the footy, trying to slow the game down. And that did play into our hands, because it did give us a little bit of an opportunity to control the footy. We had 21 disposals to 8, 12 uncontested marks to 2, 5 ground balls to 1, and 2 goals to 0 in the last 5 minutes of the second quarter. So just loading the footage up now. And there's a few players I want us to focus on. So firstly, McGrath intercept mark. It wasn't a great entry for the Cats, but what we do from here is pretty good. So firstly, Andy calls for a slow play. We haven't had much of the footy in the quarter, and the pressure has really been on. So an uncontested mark in deep in Geelong's defence, or forward line, gives us a bit of an opportunity. And you can see some good movement. So watch Roberts, and also, in this mark, watch Peter Wright. So he puts a good little block on to allow Sam Durham to take a mark. And then Artemis is the next player that I want to focus on. So you can see him here on coming through the midfield just behind the umpire, and he recognises that there's an opportunity to loop into some space there and get a little bit more corridor. Roberts is then thinking corridor as well. And I really like the way that Archie continues to work across the ground here. So we get a little bit more uncontested ball. McGrath stays in motion and gets another opportunity here. A little bit of luck here with Archie, juggling the mark, but that pulls Blitzarves away from Visentini. And then I really like, you can see Artemis running around the back there, still in motion. And then Visentini, I was a bit critical of Nick Bryan a week or two ago for just not being damaging enough when we had the ball, not taking his opponent to parts of the ground that meant that they couldn't just sit back, the opposition ruckman couldn't just sit back and defend. And a combination of Roberts coming forward, dragging Blitzarves out, and then Vigo getting dangerous in the middle of the ground is what pulled Tom Stewart out of a defensive position. And then that allows, the byproduct of that is we get a contest here by ADW, and it's Sharp who's next to the contest. So we turn a 1-on-1 into a 2-on-1 very, very quickly.
Sharp sits up nicely for
Scrap a kick forward to Caddy, who had front position. And then again, Vigo getting dangerous is what allows Peter Wright to then sneak forward.
Square, and he's got it there. And Essendon, barring a disaster.
And then Jacob Farrow keeps running as well and gets on the end of this one and gets a goal. So first goal of the game, Geelong had not necessarily switched off, but was certainly looking to ice the quarter and prevent scores. We were able to sort of counteract that and get a goal and then get the next one. So just some nice moments of ball movement, I think, and turning one-on-ones into two-on-ones, and some of our younger guys getting involved that I really liked with the build-up to that goal.
Yeah. And look, just building on what we talked about at halftime with Solly Spray, the team certainly did respond after halftime. I think that's something we have seen across the year, whether it is under Brad Scott or Dean Solomon. At breaks, and they've been able to reset and get the coach's message. More often than not, after a poor quarter, they've responded. So whilst that's pleasing to some extent, you'd like to have to avoid having to do that in the first place. But, in that second half, we really evened up the contest, and we were finally able to get some reward for effort on the scoreboard. And it was probably only the last 5 minutes of the game where we let things slip again and had the margin blow out a little bit more than we probably deserve based on the work we've done in that second half.
Yeah, we gave up a goal from a kick in and came to a little bit of a stop after that, really. They had the last 4 scoring shots of the match. So we kind of did, or they did to us at the end of the game what we did to them at the end of the second quarter. And that cost us a bit of a chance to get the scoreboard a bit closer. But over 4 quarters, we just couldn't get our clearance and contest game right often enough to get enough territory to maintain pressure on the Cats for long enough. So, yeah, I think that it was probably a deserving result in the end. Not for a lack of trying, not for a lack of effort, but certainly for a lack of concentration, a lack of experience, and a lack of quality. Solely expected better. I think as fans, we're fair to expect better, especially out of that second quarter. And then we just didn't quite finish off the game, did we?
No. But there's always positives that come out of these things. And probably the biggest positive from a player perspective was keen to see the progress of Vigo Visentini. And you mentioned a couple of good moments from him in that play before. And I know it was only his 3rd game, but he certainly showed that he'd come far from what we saw last year in those couple of games where he seemed really raw, bit of a little puppy dog bouncing around and tackling and the like, but also getting lost in transition and being handled by some pretty good ruckmen like a Luke Jackson. And I know previous week, he came up against Sam de Koning and Mark Blitzarves, who aren't natural ruckmen, but they've also played far more ruck minutes at AFL level than Vigo has. And I thought he outpointed both as a ruckman. I think Blitzarves got dangerous around the ground, but when it came to the actual ruck contest, I thought he was really good. So he had 33 hitouts, 8 of those were to advantage. He won 44% of the ruck contests that he attended. So if you look across the season of the ruckmen that do bulk ruck work, that's right on the season average in terms of ruck win rate as Sam Draper and Lachlan McAndrew at Adelaide. So for 3rd grade ruck, I thought those were pretty good numbers, and just his use of the ball and the way in which he was able to pinpoint targets, I thought was also really exciting to see. And we've still got a lot of question marks over our ruck stocks, but just that extra data point of seeing him get a game. And I know he's had his injury troubles this year, but it just gives us a bit more information heading into not only next year, but also to the draft, given that there's a pretty good ruckman up the top of the draft, right around where our pick's going to be. So it does give us just a little bit more information to make decisions around the future, whether that's the draft or whether that's who's playing as the number 1 ruck next year.
Yeah, Nick Bryan's still a young ruckman himself, but in his 34 games, he's had 17 disposals just once, and that was in our win this year against the Giants. Undoubtedly Nick's best game. For Vigo to do that in game 3 was pretty impressive. We only won first possession 35% of the time. He won the hit out. We lost centre clear at 6-17. So from a team perspective, we certainly didn't get a lot out of his ruck work, unfortunately. But then again, he was playing with a bunch of mids that he hadn't really played with before, so it's no surprise. Physically, I thought he looked up to the standard. He wasn't pushed around at all, which is impressive given his age. I thought he worked really well around the ground, including that clip that we showed. He had 33 hit-outs in his 3rd game. It took Max Gawn 11 matches to do that. It took Brodie Grundy 37. So, yeah, some really good signs from the young man. I really liked what I saw, and for me, it reconfirms my position on what we should do if we hold the number 1 pick, and that's probably just back in these 2 young guys, steer away from taking a ruck with pick 1 and address other needs. But I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to talk about that in the coming weeks, mate. Should we take a look at the week in the news?
Yeah, definitely. And as always, we'll start with our favourite segment, the Damien Barrett Award nomination. And look, it's always tough to nominate one of your own for the Damien Barrett Award. And we've actually managed to avoid it so far in terms of nominating an Essendon media personality, despite some of Matthew Lloyd's best efforts. But Tim Watson has broken new ground by being the first former Essendon player to be nominated for the Barrett Award. He said this week that any of the prospective coaches should be asking the following questions of the club. So 1, why didn't you persist with Patrick Boss? 2, why didn't you recognise the talent with Massimo D'Ambrosio? And 3, why didn't you fight harder to keep Sam Draper? John, I think we've gone over each of these decisions numerous times on the show as to why these choices were made. But given this was your nomination, you put this one up, I'm going to leave it in you to go in depth here and kill Bambi by taking down Tim Watson, who certainly is very beloved. And Tim, I just want you to know, if you are listening, this certainly wasn't my decision to put this one up. Jono, this is all yours. Go ahead.
Yeah, I doubt Tim Watson is listening, but it would be flattering if he was. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. If Tim wanted answers to those questions, he could go and get them. I think if he was to pick up the phone, if I can pick up the phone and ask someone those questions and get an answer, which I have done in the past, then I'm sure Tim can, and I'm sure he already knows the answer to those questions. So, look, I get he has a job to do, but geez, it would be nice, if he could be a little bit more constructive. Those questions could also be, what have you done that's seen Archie Roberts get better and better over each of the past 3 seasons? Why is it that Dyson Sharp has been able to come in and play such a big role in the midfield as an 18-year-old? 18-year-olds don't really do that. How did you prepare him for senior football? Is the performance of Vigo Visentini on the weekend part of the reason you were confident in letting Sam Draper go and cashing in on his compensation to then get up the draft and get another first-round draftee into the club? I just thought it was disappointing, and those comments probably really only serve one person and certainly don't help the club or what they're about to embark on. So, yeah, wasn't a fan, mate.
Yeah, no doubt. I think if you look at the holistic perspective, and obviously Pat Voss was a miss, and Fremantle's reaping the benefits of that, but we turned Massimo D'Ambrosio into Archie Roberts, you touched on there. That Sam Draper pick was used in combination with other picks to get up the draft order, and that's resulted in Dyson Sharp. So at least for a couple of those players that we've let go, we haven't, there's been positives coming to the club for them. So, yeah, I think it's real easy to do with Essendon at the moment, pick on the things that haven't worked out. If you're a better performing club, the players that you let go certainly don't come up nearly as often. But look, if there's a follow-up to last week's nomination. We don't normally do this on the Damien Barrett Award, but I think it's appropriate here. Mitch Cleary, a couple of days ago, revealed that it wasn't Mark McVeigh that had the last interview. It was actually Jamie Graham was the last to be interviewed on Friday. And last week, we nominated Tom Morris for saying that because McVeigh was the last to be interviewed, he was clearly the front runner. Now, I am a prolific Twitter user, and I do check what's on there, but I haven't quite yet seen Tom Morris update his coaching prediction yet, after assuring us that McVeigh being interviewed last meant he was the front runner. So put all your money on Jamie Graham if you follow the Tom Morris school of who's going to be the next coach. But I think, it's all up in the air, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, look, it's not like Tom to get one wrong, is it? So, yeah, look, no surprise there that he hasn't gone on record and corrected himself.
Yeah. Look, to do actually something constructive rather than talking about some schoolyard gossip about who doesn't like who anymore, I want to build a bit on what we did a couple of years ago. We really broke down the coaching candidates and sort of their backstories and what are their positives and what are their concerns about being the coach. Because what you've done is you've gone back further and looked into the specific numbers of the 3 candidates who have acted as assistant coaches over the past few years and what have they done in their areas of control, so that they're all been line coaches at their different clubs. And we can get a sense of, potentially their impact based on how their teams performed in those areas in the seasons as they were in charge. So it is really hard to judge the impact of individual line coaches, but I think you've got some interesting numbers that are worth reflecting on. So let's start with the supposed front runner in Mark McVeigh, and he's been in charge of the Swans defence these past couple of years. How have those numbers progressed since he arrived at Sydney?
Yeah, I'll preface this by saying it is very, very surface level stuff, but we'll go through it anyway. In the 2 years before Spike jumped into the Swans coaches box, keeping in mind that he went there in a development role. First, took the Allies to the Under-18 Championship Finals victory as well, which was an incredible effort. The Swans averaged 76.5 points against per game, which was ranked 5th in the AFL in 2022. And then that creeped out to 80.7 points, ranked 9th in the AFL in 2023. Spike then moved into an assistant coach role, looking after team defence for the 2024 season. Points against dropped to 78.1, ranked 6th, and then increased in 2025. The caveat here is that they had a lot of injuries and struggled as a team. So it went out to 82.7 points per game, ranked 11th. And in 2026, they averaged 82 points against. So only improved year on year by 0.7 of a point a game. but their ranking has gone from 11th to 4th, with scoring across the competition up 4 points per team per match this season. So they're the 4th best defensive side in the competition by points against under Mark McVeigh's watch this year.
Yeah. How about Murray Davis? He's also done a lot of work as Brisbane defensive coach or their backline coach. How can we trace his impact first at Brisbane and then since moving to Adelaide in a much more, overarching role, but he certainly would have had an impact there as well.
Yeah, he was the backline or defensive coach at the Lions. In his last 3 seasons, Brisbane averaged, so this is again points against per game. So in 2022, they were 12th in the AFL, 84.1 points against per game. Improved to 6th in 2023, 76.9 points per game. Won the flag in 2024, ranked 3rd with 76.4 points per game. He then moved on, and in the 2 years since, they still won the flag, obviously, in 2025, but they were 6th ranked defence for points against, 78.1, and this year that's blown out to 12 points against. 12th in the AFL, averaging 90.7 points against. If we then look at the Crows, in the 3 years prior to him joining, they were ranked 14th, 10th and 11th across 2022, 2023 and 2024. It was 83.6 points in 2000. His role is different at the Crows. As you said, he's the director of coaching, so he oversees their whole program, but their defensive profile has improved out of sight. They, in the last 2 years, they've been the 2nd best defensive team for points against. In 2025, they averaged 72.6 points against per game. This year, it's 77.9. So been a dramatic decline in defensive profile for the Lions since he's left, and significant improvement at the Crows since he's been over there.
Yeah, and then finally, let's talk about Jamie Graham, and he's actually been in charge of the other end of the ground and been responsible for Fremantle's forward line for a few years now. How's Fremantle progressed over the last few seasons in that area?
Yeah, worth noting, he was an assistant coach at the Eagles in a premiership year, and also probably worth noting, this is a team on the rise. So he's been part of that growth, but no doubt had a strong contribution on it, particularly what we've seen this year. At Freo, their points forward the year prior to him arriving was 71.7 points a game, ranked 15th. That's the 2021 season. In 2022 and 2023, they were ranked 14th in the AFL, went up to 9th in 2024, and then 7th in 2025, averaging 85.7 points. And this year, they're the number 4 highest scoring team, or the 4th highest scoring team in the competition, averaging 99.6 points per game.
Yeah, and you definitely can see the way in which the Fremantle forward line is functioning when you do watch them. It's really impressive the way they all work for each other and clear space and create opportunities up there. So yeah, I think, and again, obviously we can't do this for James Hird because he hasn't been an assistant coach, but that's not to say that James doesn't have his good qualities as well. And I think, as we've both said, we're pretty open to all 4 of the coaching candidates in terms of them having positives and negatives and all could have the potential to be successful coaches for Essendon. But just to sort of, finalise on the coaching search talk, and I'm sure this time next week we'll be discussing who that coach is, or expected it probably will be by then. And, I think many of us expected an announcement this week given the interviews were conducted last week, but it does sound like they're doing their due diligence, they're getting the background checks done, they're going to the board and really thinking through their decision. Which I think is the right play. So if you go back to the previous coach, Brad Scott, wasn't announced until the 29th of September, so 5 days after the grand final that year. And that certainly harmed his ability to get active straight away and have decisions on the list and the drafting strategy from there. We're most likely going to know our new coach before the end of the home away season. So I think they're going to have, whoever that person is going to have plenty of time to get their feet under the desk and help steer the club through this off season. So, Carlton's coach search has been going for 2 weeks longer, and I don't see any media complaining that theirs is taking too long. I think most of the complaints in the media are driven, quite frankly, by the fact that the coach search committee and the club as a whole has actually run a pretty tight ship through this process, and the media have been forced to speculate based on breadcrumbs. I'm actually really impressed with the governance in terms of the way in which they've stuck together. I think in previous years there's been leaks and there's been certain things said to certain media people that's been allowed to get out into the public. But I think, at least from what we've seen and what we can sort of speculate on based on the way the media is reporting things, it does sound like they've been pretty Loctite in their determinations and their decision making. So kudos to them, and I'm looking forward to the announcement hopefully next week.
Yeah, I think it's been well managed by the club in terms of what's getting out in the media. I think the other thing worth mentioning here, Humie, is that 3 of the 4 candidates are still involved with coaching at the moment, and teams that, would all consider themselves a genuine chance of playing finals. And it'll be up to the candidate and the individual club as to whether or not that person remains there. So in all likelihood, well, not in all likelihood, I shouldn't say that, but there is a chance that we select a senior coach who isn't able to join us until after grand final week anyway, depending on who it is and what the club does, but the club that they're at does. But I get the fans are impatient. I am too, to an extent, but I think the other thing that we have to consider in terms of the process is 3 of the candidates don't live in Melbourne, so there's a travel element that we need to coordinate. We have 3 members on the selection panel who have a full-time day job outside of the Essendon Football Club, and the same goes for the bulk of the rest of the board. So, there's a lot of detail to get across from the process, but a lot of coordination as well to get people together to go through it. And they're definitely not in a rush, and that's been made very clear in every conversation that I've had, and that's fine. If it takes, another few business days to get this sorted, to be comfortable that we've got the right decision and we've dotted all our I's, then, short-term pain, long-term gain.
Yeah. Something that was announced this week was the news that Dyson Sharp and Jacob Farrow had extended their contracts to 2030, so 2 years beyond their initial 3-year contracts that they got as first-round draftees. And if I'm not mistaken, and I think I heard this from someone else, and then feel free to point out if I'm wrong or where I got this from, but they might be the first players from the 2025 draft to extend their contracts. So that's a really great commitment from both of them, especially since they are originally from interstate. Both of them made really strong impressions and are already, major parts of the senior side. And, of that 2025 draft crop, only Willem Dersma has played more games or senior AFL games than Farrow, whilst, Dyson, as well as physically looking like he's already played 150 games, plays like he's already played 150 games. So really excited about what these 2 players can bring going forward.
Yeah, it's a great show of faith in the club. And as you said, both from interstate. So no thought of homesickness there, no thought of waiting. They want to be part of the solution and help take the club forward. If we add that to Caddy and Durham that have signed long-term, Angus Clark extended just before Christmas, Roberts and Kako have extended too. So, yeah, this young core is really committed to the rebuild, which is great to see. And these 2 are certainly playing beyond their years. I think, that we're not too far away from seeing Jacob Farrow, the midfielder, get Sully Roby back and fit next year. The 3 of them will have the keys to our midfield with Sam Durham, I expect, for a long, long time to come.
Yeah, and I just want to address something on Dyson Sharp that I've sort of seen floating around different fan communities about what he projects to be. And I think there's a few people concerned that Dyson might be another Ben Hobbs. So, both were pick 13s in their draft, both slid from where people thought they might have gone in the draft, both drafted as inside mids. So on the superficial level, that I can sort of see where people are getting their concerns from. But I think from both the numbers and the eye test, Dyson Sharp is already well advanced where Ben was at the same time in their careers. And also think he has much more scope to grow and impact going forward.
Yeah, Ben was a really good contested ball winner as a junior, but he had a couple of flaws at senior level that he just wasn't able to get out of his game. He would lose his feet too often, and too often he was a one-effort player, which meant that more often than not he got bypassed in transition. And that's both with and without the footy. Dyson doesn't have those traits in his game. He's a bit over-eager with ball in hand, a bit rushed in game one. In fact, it was probably really only half of one game, really. Once he got the speed of the game, he's looked very much at home and certainly doesn't have that issue that Ben had with losing his feet. It's one of the real strengths of his game.
Yeah. I guess, from a numbers perspective, in the first seasons they played, Ben Hobbs played 17 games, Dyson Sharp's played 13. Fingers crossed he plays the last 2 and ends on 15. To this stage, Dyson's averaging 2.5 more disposals per game, 1 more tackle per game, 1.3 more contested possessions per game. He's had 1 less clanger per game, so he's not giving away the ball back as often as Ben was. He's averaging 2 more clearances. He's attended nearly twice as many centre bounces as Ben did in his first year. Ben had 2 20-plus disposal games in his opening year, whilst Dyson has already had 5, including 4 on the trot. So, I think at least from the numbers, Dyson is also very much ahead of where Ben was at the time.
Yeah, I think the only thing robbing Dyson of a few extra games this year was that shoulder injury he picked up against the Giants earlier this season. And there's a lot of maturity in how he's come back from that alone. I mean, the courage that he displayed and desperation that he displayed in what caused that injury in the first place. And then if I reflect back on Ben Hobbs's first season, we played a game up at the Gabba and he went to ground on the boundary line and then took time to get up and then missed the opportunity to get involved. And Zach Merritt went over and pulled him up on it and had some words. And Hobbs then snapped back and had to go back, which was, I guess, sort of bordering a little bit on petulant behaviour. I think we need to caveat this by saying that, we know our development at the club at the time wasn't anywhere near where it needed to be, but I think they're two very different young men in terms of their application to their game at the same age.
You're right. And you mentioned it earlier, just the things you can see from the eye test, the way Ben Hobbs would go to ground too easily. He really struggled to take the first option when he had the ball. And I really don't see those issues with the way Dyson has played this year. I'm stealing one of your maxims, Jono, in that you can be slow on the football field, or you can think slow on the football field, but you can't be both. And that was probably Ben Hobbs' problem. He wasn't fleet of foot and he wasn't quick of mind. Dyson Sharp, isn't quick of body, or at least compared to the top level speedsters in the AFL, but he's very clearly, quick of mind and really thinks through the situation he's in to find the best option. So for me, despite the superficial similarities between the two, I'm much more confident in Dyson's future than I ever was with Ben's.
Yeah, I think Dyson's got some similar traits to Jobe Watson, really, doesn't he, in how he plays the game and thinks about it. He's going to be a very good player for us for a long, long time. You and I were both very, very keen on getting him to the football club. Neither of us proclaimed to be draft experts, but he was one that stood out to us from a long time out or a long way out. And I'm really, really glad that he plays for our footy club.
Yeah, it certainly was a tight 7 or 8 minutes between our Jacob Farrow pick and then Melbourne's 2 picks, and me hoping that he got through. I was very happy when Melbourne surprised everyone by picking Latrell Pickett, and that left Dyson on the board for us. And I was very, very happy when his name was read out at pick 13 last year. Moving on to sort of Essendon's future and trying to get that experienced talent or experienced players onto the list to really help with the list profile and the development of the rest of the players. It does sound like, according to Cal Toomey, we made an approach to Scott Pendlebury to sound out whether he'd be interested in coming to the Bombers as a player and then a coach. And it does seem to have gone nowhere. It really is the right sort of move the club should be making to try and get people into the club that can help set standards and educate the younger players about what's required to get to the pinnacle of the competition.
Yeah, I would expect that Pendlebury isn't the first and won't be the last player of that profile we've approached. It's really, really hard to get players out when they're still firmly in their club's best 23, and Pendle's most certainly is. And people will have their own views on Collingwood's list and where they're going to be in the years to come, but he would still be thinking that he's an opportunity to play in another premiership before his career is done. So I can understand why the lure on the surface probably isn't there for him just yet. And I think with some of the other retirements starting to happen at the Pies, that the likelihood of him staying increases. But it's the exact sort of approach that we should be making. You only find out, you only get a yes if you ask the question in the first place, I guess. So no harm in asking.
No, indeed. And just finally, another thing from Cal and from Gettable is that we have interest in Adelaide's Luke Pedlar. What do you know about Luke, Jono, and is he someone we should be looking at?
Yeah, a little bit. He's pick 11 in the 2020 draft. So coincidentally, he was the pick immediately after Cox, Perkins and Reid. Like a lot of players from that draft, he's had a pretty horrid run with injury. He had a shoulder reco really early in his career. He had osteitis pubis as well. He's out at the moment with a pretty bad hamstring injury, which will probably rule him out for the rest of the season, I would think. He was drafted as a bit of a hybrid, sort of contested mid/forward. He's been used mostly as a small forward, although he's not that small. I think he's about 183 centimetres. So sort of more that high half forward, but they have some players who fill that role now, the Crows as well. They got Archie in for Brisbane as an example. I can see the interest. He was talked about as a really strong leader in his draft year. So on the surface, without obviously not knowing him closely, he seems to pass that character test that we're looking to build at the club. He hit 25 goals in 21 games in 2023. He's really strong at the contest. He thrives on tackling and pressure, which we're obviously trying to build more into our DNA. I think he's the type of player that could rotate with the likes of Durham and Roby through that half forward and midfield role. He's a really penetrating kick. He knows where the goals are. He has a bit of a tendency to over kick when he's on the run, and that's something that would need some work. The there would obviously be some concerns on his body given his injury profile, but I'd imagine he'd come pretty cheap. He brings a senior sort of more. He's only played, I think, 40 games in total, but a senior body. Could even be a delisted free agent. So I think this is just us doing our initial due diligence on a player who might be squeezed out of the Crows come the end of the year. But yeah, a bit of water under the bridge there. Shall we take a look at the Swans?
Yeah, let's do it. And due to the wonderful and not at all flawed AFL fixturing system, that the Bombers face Sydney this week for the first time in the second last week of the season. The Swans have stepped up from missing the finals last year. They're currently sitting second on the ladder with 16 wins and a percentage of 134. Their last 6 rounds have seen wins over the Dogs, Giants and Saints and Port, whilst losses have come against Freo and Adelaide. So they've been teams, in that middle and lower part of the ladder, but they've sort of lost to the sides around them there. So it'd be interesting to see how they're going at this point. But again, they're playing us, the bottom team of the ladder, so you would expect they would be pretty confident in this one.
Well, yeah, you would think they'd be confident against anyone at the moment. They've won their last 3 by 51, 19 and 97 points. So it's a pretty imposing form line. That said, they've lost 3 of their last 4 games at the MCG, which stretches back to the 2024 grand final. So haven't played a lot there recently. And when they have, they haven't won a lot. And 9 of their last 11 they've lost at the MCG if you go back to the 2022 grand final. So it's not exactly a happy hunting ground for them. And hopefully there's a few demons in their minds when they run out there on Sunday.
Yeah, fingers crossed. The Swans have been the most potent offense this year, so they're averaging 109 points per game, which is 29 points higher than their average from last year. Their scores against remain the same, they're averaging 82 points conceded per game, although last year that made them the 11th ranked defence, whereas this year that makes them the 4th, which you talked about a bit earlier in the show. As you would expect from their scoring profile, they have the highest inside 50 count of 60 per game. However, they're also conceding 54.5, which is the 5th highest in the league. So they're playing a game style where it's really sort of ping-ponging between forward 50s, and Sydney is really relying on their ability to transition the ball and from that back half, and they're one of the best sides in doing it, but they do give you looks inside 50. They also have a forward 50 efficiency of 53%, whilst only conceding scores on 48% of occasion. So whilst they are letting teams have a lot of looks, they're being pretty good at defending those inside 50s from their opposition. The Swans are really setting the standard for that, fast ball movement that's so been talked about this year. They're strongly reliant on handball. They've got a kick to handball ratio of 1.16, which is the lowest in the comp, and this helps them get territory. So they're not just handballing in a circle. They average 3.6 metres gain per handball, which is the most in the comp. So they're using the ball by hand, and it's really getting them moving forward. And when they're at their best, it's mesmerising to watch.
Yeah, high energy games of footy, isn't it? They're kind of at times looks a bit more like basketball than it does football, just the way that their games ping up and down, as you said. They're a threat from all sources as well. They use that handball to drive scoring chances from the back half, but they're equally comfortable using it just to get territory and restart scoring from the front or create scoring chances from front half or from clearance. It's pretty sobering reading, but they're ranked number 1 for scores from defensive half chains, number 2 for scoring from forward half chains, and number 2 at scores from clearances. So, most teams have a scoring profile where they have a strength or maybe 1.5 strengths, and you can kind of look to lock down on one. The Swans can score from all 3 main sources, and yeah, it's a real weapon of their game.
You're right, and it's as much about their ability to take advantage of when they do win the ball at those sources. So that in terms of their raw numbers, they're ranked 9th for centre clearance differential and 11th for stoppage clearance differential. But as you can tell from their scoring profile, when they do win those stoppages or their centre clearances, they're really effective. So they're the second best side at scoring from centre clearance at 16 per game, and they score the same from boundary throw-ins, which is the best in the comp. But that's with a contested game that's only ranked 9th in the comp with plus 1.62, and they're actually pretty poor at ground ball gets, which surprises me when I look deeper in the numbers. They're minus 3.71 per game to their opponents. But yeah, it's one of those things where they're not always the best at winning the ball, but when they do, they make it count.
Yeah, and this is a big challenge playing them, isn't it? It's not a case, as I said, just limiting one area of their game. They can get you in all areas of the game. They can leak scores from centre bounce at times, though. They're right on the AFL average for scores against, and they've had some games this year where they have coughed up some scores. They can have a bit of a tendency to be a little bit downhill at centre bounce, so they can get you when that clicks and they get it right. It's a big ask for our ruckman to be really competitive and not give them easy looks, but yeah, if we can get that right, we might have an opportunity to get some quick entries and expose them the other way.
Yeah. As you'd imagine, from the side that uses the ball by hand the most, the Swans actually take the least amount of marks this year with only 80 per game. That said, though, they're also really good at denying the opposition control in the air, so they don't concede 82 per game. They're the second best side at taking marks inside 50, and part of that is from their fast ball movement, creating opportunities, whilst they're also the second best at defending them. So they have they concede the second lowest amount of marks inside 50 by their opponents. Finally, they have the number one intercept side in the competition, so they're averaging plus 3.3 per game, and this translates to them being the best side at scoring from turnover and the fifth best at defending turnover as well. So, yeah, as you say, that they're hitting their marks all across the ground in their offensive profile. They have struggled against the better teams, but they've done really well at putting away the lower teams. And unfortunately, we're coming as a lower team on the ladder this week. So it's a big watch.
Yeah, and look, as you'd expect from a team that's second on the ladder, almost all parts of their game are pretty sound. They're fourth for defending D50 to forward 50 transition, number one for conceding scores from D50 to forward 50 chains. They're fourth for tackles, fourth for inside 50 tackles, second for pressure acts. So their defensive and pressure games really sound as well. We've been a much better pressure team the past month, and that's an area we're going to have to bring this week. The Swans are 17th in the AFL for ground ball differential. In their losses this year, they've had a ground ball differential average of minus 8.2, and they give up 6 more 450 ground balls in their losses than they do in their wins. So I think for us, if there's a chink that we can expose, it's that front-on pressure game to try and get the ball onto the ground, turn it into a bit of a scrap. And if we can achieve that, easier said than done, then on the ground is where we might have an advantage, particularly given they're a team that does play with a lot of height at both ends of the ground.
Yeah. Well, moving on to selection, and again, as a Sunday game, we have got the joys of the extended bench, and Essendon have named 5 players with Angus Clark, Elijah Sardis, Harrison Jones, Nick Bryan, and Lockie Blackiston all named in the side, with Sam Durham going out injured, and then Zach Johnson, a little bit surprising to me, going out omitted. Probably the case that Angus Clark is coming in and replacing Zach Johnson there. But it'll be interesting to see what they do with else. Obviously, Nick Bryan was the number one ruck until he missed with injury. And I think with the way the Swans are structured up with Curnow and McDonald and McLean have been playing the past few weeks, you would expect us to want to bolster our key defensive stocks. We've essentially been running a Zach Reid, Cole Langford combo in defence, but if Sydney is going to run with the 3 talls, you'd expect one of Harrison Jones or Lockie Blackiston to come in to play defence. And then it's a question of whether you run Nick Bryan in support of Vigo, who's named as the number one ruck. You'd expect that means that he is going to be playing again off last week, or you bring in like an Elijah Sardis and try and get a bit more advantage in the midfield.
Yeah, Durham spent last week as a forward and seemed pretty clear something wasn't right. So it makes you wonder a little bit why he played last week, unless maybe he did something in the warm-up and was able to get through the game. But once it rested, it blew up. You'd imagine, as you said, Clark does come straight back in. I think we're likely to play with the 2 rucks, and we might see Bryan and Visentini partnership for the first time at AFL level. Vigo's shown that he can take a mark and go forward at VFL level. I think we might try and just make them a little bit more accountable in the air this week. And then it's a question, as you said, whether we bolster our midfield rotation with the Elijah Sardis coming in at the expense of someone like Perkins or Unwin. I wouldn't be surprised to see us roll the dice a little bit down back with their height, and we might see someone like Kyle Langford take the Charlie Curnow matchup, particularly when he gets up the ground, leaving Zach Reid on Logan McDonald. It will leave us a little bit tight if McLean plays as well.
And then on to the Swans. They've got some pretty big ins with Dane Rampy, Brodie Grundy, Angus Sheldrick all named, as well as Caden Cleary, while Lewis Melican has gone out omitted.
Yeah, good position for them to be in, isn't it? This late in the year, they bring in Sheldrick and Rampy and Grundy, who are all in their best 23. It'll cause a little bit of a reshuffle. I would imagine Sheldrick will come into that midfield group, and Sarong, who played midfield last week for the bulk of the game and a little bit the week before, will go back into their back 6 or 7. It'd be interesting to see whether Will Green holds his spot. They might look to go with 2 rucks. We've been well beaten in the air the last 2 weeks. 11 contested marks to 1 last week, 17 to 3 the week before. They might look to replicate that, but the flip side of that is it might give us a bit more firepower at ground level, part of the game that we'll touch on later. They've also got McLean in that side too. So I guess if they do go with the 2 rucks, it'll basically leave them with 3 permanent tall key forwards. And yeah, they might need to think about how they balance it out. So yeah, it'd be an interesting one to see how they finish up as well as us.
Yeah, I'd expect they'd be thinking less about us and the way we've been playing. I think they're going to want to set up the way that they want to play in finals. And you mentioned that their MCG form hasn't been great these past few years. They're probably going to want to get a team set up how they expect to play against the finalists in September. If they do end up playing games at the MCG, I think they're going to have their eyes much more on that as opposed to what we're going to do this week. But again, look, just sort of talking about the numbers, like you really have to disrupt the Swans this week. You can't let them sort of get ahead of steam, or otherwise they'll steamroll you. So this is where stripping the ball at stoppage and winning ground ball is going to be crucial, because they're not the reasons the Swans have been, not the areas the Swans have been strong at this year. So that's where they are gettable. But, sort of like we talked about last week, if the Swans get on top in areas they've been weak at this year to go with their strengths, then they are going to rip us apart.
Yeah, they certainly are. It's a really good test for this young group. I think they'll be looking forward to it and relishing it. We've been really good at working on coming up at the opposition when we don't have the footy. We've shown some clips at us, clips of it over the last few weeks. The Swans will run at us if we let them. So you're right. We need to be brave here and take the game to them. There'll be times where that's going to, get really, really ugly. But I think if we're passive and we sit back, then it's going to get ugly anyway. They'll get us from stoppage or clearance if we allow that to happen. So I really hope that our coaches really encourage this group to get up in the faces of the Swans. They have a couple of hotheads too. So ruffle a few feathers and see whether we can put some pressure on. We spoke about their ground ball differential in their losses earlier. AFL average is 14.5 forward 50 ground balls a game. Giants and Brisbane are 1 and 2 in the AFL. They both average a smidge over 20. The Swans concede 20.8 in their losses. So when they're not at their best and when teams are pressuring them, they can lose their structure. Teams can get quick entry and then beat them at ground level. They do have a lot of sort of mid to talls in their back six. They want the ball in motion. They want it fluid. We need to limit the amount of game time that's played like that. And our best opportunity to do that is to really get up at them and slow them down through pressure.
Yeah, and that's really going to be important with the way in which the Swans move the ball and the fact that the Swans are the best at scoring from intercept while we're the worst at defending scores from intercept. So their average scores from intercept and our average scores against are roughly even. And so if you're looking for a small marker of success from this game, I think we can keep them to below their season average at scores from intercept. I would, even if that, doesn't result in a win for us, I would actually consider that to be a good effort considering where the sides are currently at.
Yeah, that would be a great outcome. It's 18th versus 2nd, so we can't be naive to what a challenge this is for the group. There's a lot to be said for just setting some really straightforward targets, and I'd actually be inclined to take the scoreboard out of it and just keep it straightforward. So, yeah, the outcome you want is to limit scoring in particular areas and not be overran, but you do that through getting some basics right. So I think so. Pressure rating and getting that high like it has been over the last couple of weeks. Setting targets around tackles, 18 a quarter would get us to 70 plus, which would get us up in the upper echelon of what the best teams are doing from a tackling perspective. 6 forward half intercepts would mean that we're getting some good ground ball on the forward line and competing and contesting and not allowing them to just waltz out. So I think, this game for us is just about getting the basics right as often we can around some of those key metrics. And then you would hope that areas on the scoreboard look after themselves off the back of it.
Yeah. And, you could talk about so many of the Swans players because we've got such a, we've got stars across every line, but I think, rather than depressing ourselves by talking about all of them, let's just focus on a couple of them. And in Heaney, Goulden and Warner, the Swans probably have the best 1, 2, 3 midfield punch, at least when it comes to attacking options. And, it's impossible to stop them all. I guess, if you had to, try and put the clamps on one, who's the one you'd want to be limiting their output?
It's a really imposing task, isn't it? Almost 50% of Heaney's possessions are contested. For Warner, it's 40% and 28% for Goulden. Goulden's much more reliant on handball receives. He's number 3. number 3 ranked midfielder in the AFL for receiving the ball by hand. So and then you got Heaney's their number 1 mid for clearance and first possession. And by a bit of a margin. So I think you start there if you're going to look to limit one, and Caldwell would probably be the one that needs to get that focus. Big ask, Sharp was brave against Bailey Smith last week and did a good job in the context of an 18-year-old playing against one of the informed mids in the competition. I think Heaney's an even bigger ask because he can win the ball on inside. He's explosive, really creative around goals. So I think giving Caldwell a bit of a job this week is the way to go. Will Green played his first game last week, 20-year-old ruckman. I think you're right, Humie. They'll look to settle their team down and play a team and structure that is closer to what they want to see in finals. So Grundy back with McLean as their 2 ruckmen, Jesse Dottoli and Papley as small forwards. Dottoli had a really, really good game last week, by the way, got the Rising Star nomination. They both spent a little bit of time rotating through the midfield. And interestingly, Jay Sarong, who was recruited from the Hawks as a key defender, was their most attended centre-bounce mid last week. But I expect he probably slides back into the back line this week. I guess that is an area that might point towards Asada's inclusion, and that is that their top-end midfield is incredible, but it does lack a little bit of depth. There's capable players there. They have the option of rotating Mills there, although they prefer not to. They have Sheldrick back amongst their inclusions, but I think, one area that maybe we can get some ascendancy and might point towards Elijah Sardas coming in this week is that there could be an opportunity for us to expose their 4th, 5th and 6th choice midfielders.
Yeah. Well, look, we're coming to the end of the season. We've certainly had a good look at a lot of the young players and they've been exposed to high-level AFL. I guess is there anything left to learn about the playing list over these last couple of games, or is it just a matter of sort of cruising to the finish line and trying to get through without any major injuries?
Still think there's a little bit to get out of it, mate. Over the last couple of years, I've spoken a fair bit about how important it is to have examples of what good looks like in coaching. And it was interesting to hear Solly speak about reference points in his press conference after the Geelong game. And this is another chance against a really good team to hopefully get some more positive reference points to show the group what good looks like and what can happen if we get that right. Perkins, Unwin, Sardas, Setterfield are the 4 in the squad of 26 without a contract for 2027. I think we know what sort of player or players we have with Setterfield and Perkins by now, but it's a good opportunity if he gets it for Unwin to press his claims for a spot on the list next season. Obviously, it's still an area on the ground of real need for us. I guess there's an opportunity to maybe see a little bit more of Elijah Sardas as well, but it feels like maybe that ship has sailed, but still some question marks there. Potential opportunity to see 2 rucks and how they might function together at the top level for the first time. And then there's, of course, continuity for the young group and another game for all of them to play together. Plus, for me, at least, and people might have different views on this, but it's the last 2 games in all likelihood that we'll see Zach Merritt in the red and black, and he will go down as one of our greatest of all time. And hopefully we get a couple of last reminders of just what a player he's been for us, and he goes out, if this is the end of his career in the red and black, that he goes out playing some really good footy for us, and we get a couple of fond memories to remember him by on the way out.
Definitely fingers crossed on that. Look, that will do us for this week. Big thanks to you, Jono, for all your efforts. For once, actually, it was me holding us up tonight. So, sorry about that, but always great to spend some time with you. Big thanks to everyone for their support on the video I put out this week, sort of comparing what Brad Scott walked into in 2022 to what the new coach is going to walk into in 2026. It was fun to put together, and there's been a lot of positive comments on that. So once again, thanks for people's attention on that. And of course, big thanks to all our listeners and patrons who do make doing this so enjoyable. The Patreon chat continues to sustain me where other forms of social media depress me. So keep up the great work, guys, in there. Any final words from you, Jono?
No, thank you, mate. Yeah, really big weekend for our club. I think the coaching decision obviously edges closer. VFL take on the Swans for a chance to play finals. Round 1 for the AFLW, and then our AFL men's side has a chance to disrupt the Swans' push towards finals. So I'm really looking forward to it. Can't wait to get out there.
Jealous that I won't be able to make it out there on Sunday, but we'll be supporting hard from the couch at home. Again, that will do us for this evening. Thanks again for listening. And as always, stay safe and go Dons.